talk to you about text technologies, which is a research project and sequence of courses at Stanford that we teach with undergraduate and graduate students who will find themselves in a room, classics students seated next to math students, science, technology and society students seated next to English majors, to answer what I think are some of the most important questions about the history of human communication. Text technologies addresses the production, the transmission, and the reception of all forms of meaningful human communication from 60,000 BCE to the present day, from inscriptions on rocks to Flickr to Tumblr. One of the key things that is of interest to us at the moment, and I'm sure you've come across this in all kinds of formats, is this issue. That the book, as we know it, is dead. That in the last few years, the increase of electronic book sales, the decrease in reading, particularly among the younger generations, and falling sales and closing bookstores means that effectively we are saying goodbye to that beloved thing, the book. But the question then is, what is a book? What constitutes a book? And I'd like you to think just for a moment about what should we think about Hamlet? Should we consider it to be or not to be the performance on the stage? Should we consider it to be the thing that we buy when we go to the bookshop and sit and read it? Should we consider it to be the downloaded e-file that we put onto our tablet? What should we consider it to be? Well, the tablet. Can we consider the tablet as a book? On the left-hand side, we have from 700 BCE Gilgamesh, and this is tablet 11 at the British Museum, which reveals the story of the flood that is seen in so many world myths. Looking at that tablet, you can see the line that runs down the middle of it, which suggests something page-like about its structure, and so perhaps we can think of that large tablet or this little tablet, 3,500 BCE Babylonian cuneiform, as a book. Or perhaps we might think of the Etruscan book to the right on the slide, which was produced around 600 BCE, which is kept in a museum in Bulgaria now, and where the leaves of the book are made out of metal, but not just any metal, they're made out of gold. They have those images on them, but what makes it book-like is the sequence of these gold sheets with their images and the binding that holds the book together. But because the sheets are not the normal kinds of substrates we might think of, should we then think of this more as a hybrid technology, a technology that brings together in its bookness a variety of different kinds of methods of production? Hybrid technologies is something that very much is reflected in the whole history of communication production. So, for example, in this 15th century book of hours, which we have at Stanford University Library's special collections, all of the word text that you can see is print, so post-1455 when Gutenberg invented print. But all of the decorative and ornamental elements that you can see are hand-done, as in manuscript technologies. So here we definitely seem to be talking about hybrid technologies as part of a characteristic of what constitutes bookness. But this hybrid technology can be seen in many manifestations over the course of history, and this rather beautiful and pensive Roman woman was painted onto the wall of a house in Pompeii, destroyed in 79 CE by Mount Vesuvius. And you can see she's holding her stylus to her mouth in that kind of reflective way. But what she's actually holding in her hands is not what we would typically regard as a book, and we're back again to the tablet. These are a sequence of wax tablets used to write generally things that were fair copy on. What makes these tablets interesting is that they're combined, and you can see that there's a binding structure on the right-hand side of the book as we're looking at it. So this may in fact be one of the first codex forms of books recorded in the history of text technologies. And we're back again to this idea of the tablet. If we can consider this lady's book as, or her sequence of wax tablets as a book, then can we consider the tablet to the right of that on your slide also to be a book? This particular tablet is made out of marble. It is 5 foot 1 inch tall, so here-ish, and about 3 foot 2 inch wide, so about here-ish. Black marble inscribed with real gold. It's a Buddhist text. It's a sacred text. Can we think of this as a book? We can think of this as a book because there are 730 of these tablets forming a book of 1,460 pages in what is considered the world's largest book in Myanmar, the Kuthador Pagoda, built by King Min towards the end of the 19th century, obviously as an act of veneration to Buddha. And each of those tablets is housed in its own sacred marble and precious jewel shrine. So the binding of this book is not the typical binding of a book. The binding of this book is a boundary wall that surrounds this very large expanse, which altogether makes up this Buddhist text. So then, is a book about size? Does size really matter? And the answer is, with the world's biggest traditional kind of book, size very much matters. And this is the Codex Gigas, produced towards the end of the 12th century at an unknown monastery in Bohemia, where it measures 3 feet by 1.5 feet. And each of the folios that you can see is an entire animal skin. And here I have a uterine calf skin that we would use to create a book from. And there are 106 lines of script per page. And it might have taken the scribe, male or female, up to 5 years to write. And so arduous was the task and so incredible the achievement that it said that the devil helped in the production of the work, and there he is looking very gleeful on the right-hand side. But if size matters, and here we are thinking about the flexibility of form of the book, then perhaps we should consider for a moment a very teeny-weeny little book indeed, which at 2.4 times 2.9 millimeters is, if you think about it, microscopic and can only be investigated by microscopic implements to understand that the pages of the book contain the alphabet. But this book is what we would call an artist's book. This book is not really very functional. This book cannot be used without other kinds of implements. And so we might think of the art quality of the book as overriding its functionality. And one could therefore say the same of something as remarkable as this: the beautiful and contemporary sculptures of the anonymous Edinburgh book sculptor, who in his or her love of the form of the book creates out of standard books these amazing work of arts that represent what the book contains. And in this case, it's Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie, and those figures represent obviously the characters, and they are left anonymously at libraries and bookshops in Edinburgh with little notes about how we need to keep books and reading as a major part of our culture. But this book is dysfunctional. This book does not function as a book. And so again, we come to this question of books as art, and we come back to this question of the tablet, but the modern tablet with astonishing e-books that now demand a sort of reciprocal relationship with the reader. So the book on the left is the Fantastic Flying Books of Mr. Maurice Lesmore, and it is an e-book, but it is also a film because it won the Oscar last year for Best Short Animated Film. And the book on the right is Al Gore's Our Choice, which demands that you fiddle with it with your fingers to create the wind of the wind tunnels that are such an integral part of alternate technology that he's talking about. So these are augmented books. These are books where technology allows us to interact with them in very meaningful ways. And augmented books also contain an augmentation that is invisible. And that is represented rather beautifully by Richard Angeville in his 15th century work, The Philobiblion, where he tells us that books delight us, that they comfort us, that they lend validity to what we do, that they're as well for things to contemplate that are of this world as well as a mirror of eternity. And it's that invisible augmentation of the book that is really indicative of the emotional response that we feel when we read, when we learn, when we handle these materials. Like John Steinbeck, whose own copy of the 15th century classical chivalric tale Le Morte d'Arthur is in Stanford University Library as part of our Steinbeck collection. And Steinbeck got this book from the editor, Eugene Vinever, and clearly loved it so much that he felt a compulsion to stamp his name all over it, which he does on every edge, as well as writing his name. But he engaged with it too, through writing into the book all of his notes for the creation of his own Arthurian tale. And he couldn't be bothered to get up from the table. So engrossing was the book. So when he wanted to mark where he was, he used Band-Aid in order to do that, badly marking the book in the process. And we also have Elizabeth of York's little prayer book that was handed down to her. It was already 300 years old when she got it. She was Henry VII's wife, handed down to her by her mother. She wrote her name in it. She loved it, and it's come to us as our most recent acquisition in special collections. And you will be able to see this book when we digitize it and put it online in our Mirador browser interface, where you can go on and you can help us annotate the book or read the book. And this becomes, in other words, a real augmented book, a book where learning and crowdsourcing and the knowledge of readers and users can be built into the replication of the book in that way. So the question then about the form of the book. It's transformative, transforms lives, but it also transforms through the whole of its history. And I think if a book could be made to speak, it would probably use the voice of Mark Twain and said, "The reports of my death are exaggerated." Thank you.